My story is an unusual one for a historian. I wanted to tell a story of resilience and innovation in Pompeii and show it differently. Would it be appropriate to recreate a disaster in modern times that we've all witnessed in that way? Would it be appropriate doing it 2,000 years ago? After an earthquake which hit the town in AD 62, which destroyed much of the city. I couldn't believe I found this. I felt like someone should have found this before.
2, 1, rolling.
This is StoryCo, the podcast about the business of story and storytelling. I'm James Kirkham. Let's get into it. My next guest grew up without classics or any sense that becoming a historian was even a possibility. Dr. Jess Venner did a publishing degree and spent her early 20s in marketing. Then she decided ancient Rome is where she needed to be. So she funded her own sabbatical, enrolled a master's in classics and studied on her lunch breaks while holding down a day job. Jess quit overnight, retrained as an archaeologist, got a PhD from Birmingham University and spent a year at the British School at Rome. She's now a research fellow at Oxford University. Her latest book, The Lost Voices of Pompeii, follows 7 ordinary people through the city's last day. Not emperors, not generals, the people that history ignored. She's also passionate about making history accessible to new generations, and her social media channel, Life in the Past Lane, has amassed hundreds of thousands of followers. Dr. Jess Venner, tell me a story.
My story is an unusual one for a historian. We sort of imagine historians to be, covered in tweed and with, a very posh voice. And although I've been told I've got a posh voice now.
I think you're well spoken.
Thank you. But I'm actually from East London, Essex, East London border, depending on who you're asking which side I'm from. But I grew up in a place called Hainault. On the end of the Central Line, and I didn't have a very good education. My school was always in special measures, and we had sort of knife crime and drug problems at the school and riots and God knows what else going on. So it was a real struggle and a distraction. And, even just trying to learn was always a bit of a tricky one. I did really well despite all of that, thanks to my family with their encouragement. But I wasn't exposed to things like classics and ancient history, and Latin was absolutely not even something I even really knew about, to be honest. So when I left, I saw The Devil Wears Prada, basically. And I didn't take the message from it that I should have.
That's so funny.
And I decided to do magazine publishing at the University of the Arts, and I learned how to print and how to brand and how to market, and absolutely loved it. But while I was doing that, I started reading a book about the first empresses of Rome, and I became completely hooked and realised, that's something I maybe should be doing, because I started just devouring anything to do with ancient Rome. And it was always ancient Rome for me, not the Greeks or anyone else. It was Rome. And my parents said, no, you're finishing your BA, you have to finish, which I'm glad they did. I got a first, and then I went off and got a job in marketing straight away. But, after a while, it just wasn't fulfilling me. So I started a master's part-time with Birkbeck, and that meant I could do it on my lunch breaks, essentially.
You did a master's on your lunch break?
I did.
Gosh.
I was really determined. It took me 2 years, and I paid in installments to do it.
So impressive.
Thank you. I loved it so much. And I realised that I was quite good at that, and I got a distinction in that. And I thought, okay, maybe there's something here. And so I saved up some money, and I wasn't earning very much. And I come from a background where my family are incredibly supportive, but weren't able to support those things that other people that are in history, traditionally speaking in classics, might have those opportunities. And so I had to work really hard to save up this money to basically take a self-funded sabbatical. And I went in and quit my job overnight.
Wow.
And they said, oh, this is risky. You sure you want to do this? And I just knew I should. And that was when I'd, planned out this long Excel spreadsheet of all these opportunities I lined up: conferences, retraining as an archaeobotanist. I went on archaeological digs in Italy and in the UK. I tried to learn Latin by myself, and I did all of these different things. And I obviously started in Pompeii. That's where I went to first.
The distinctive nature of your entry into this world, do you think that's what's led you to some of the means with which you explore it now, and the techniques and your delivery and the platforms that you're on. Like, do you see that natural combination, like the marketeer in you, dare I say, an understanding of brand, of dissecting things differently?
I think so. I think equally, having the upbringing I did, I, watched my parents be very industrious, and my family around me and the people around me being very industrious, and the East End is typical for that.
Yeah.
That's one thing, I think. And I took...
work ethic was there from minute one.
100% work ethic was there. You work for yourself. You don't have excuses. You don't take no for an answer. And you work on yourself in that way. And you don't give up, essentially, because there's no other option. There wasn't an excuse for me ever. And so I just didn't view, these barriers as barriers. It was just something I needed to get around.
But I kind of love the fact that you're so quick to reference them now, and the lack of classics and the lack of Latin. Is that because, is it still like that, where everyone comes with a specific degree and a specific kind of understanding of, let's say, of a language like Latin? Like, is that the norm still in 2026?
It's an interesting one because, traditionally speaking, and I'm an advocate for Latin being studied, absolutely, and it should be. It's very important. But there is, a prejudice that that surrounds classics that is not necessarily completely true, but definitely access to it is exactly the stereotype. It's, boarding schools and private education, essentially, that are privileged enough to be able to do those things and take it for granted, to be honest. It's just accepted that that's the norm. And of course, naturally, those people end up in the top universities, and so the problem perpetuates. But it's not a problem in the sense that at the same time they are preserving it. So, and they should be doing those things, but the point is other people should be as well, and they should be exposed to those opportunities, or at least given the chance to do them. So it's a bit difficult, but essentially in academia, so I'm at the University of Oxford now, and I'm an ancient historian and an archaeologist, but I'm not a classicist, so I don't specialise in literature in that traditional way. And, straddling ancient history and archaeology is quite unusual. Usually you're just an archaeologist, or you're just a classicist or ancient historian. It's very rare to find someone that's doing both. So essentially what that means for me is that I use archaeology to inform story building.
How interesting.
Yes, which is, of course, what I've done with The Lost Voices of Pompeii.
Yeah, and I love this because it feels very action-orientated kind of methodology. As you say, it's like applying the actual exploration onto the history of that past. Tell us more about that. Yeah,
so with The Lost Voices of Pompeii, I came to know a lot of people in the city very, very well during my PhD, where I studied urban agriculture in Pompeii. So vineyards and orchards and vegetable plots, perfume gardens, that sort of thing.
Wow.
And I came to know ordinary people very well. And I've chosen to focus on ordinary working people because of my background and my interest in that. Because they're not spoken about, really. Only just in archaeology are we starting to look at these people. But previously, they weren't really interesting to archaeologists.
And as a kid, I remember being taken to Pompeii, and the imagery that stayed with me for 40 years is it's such a slice of time moment, isn't it? But you did something different by choosing to spend time really understanding those individuals rather than any of the rulers and the leaders and everything.
Exactly that. And you're right with the slice. So I wanted to give a slice of Pompeian society. And I got to know these people very well, but I felt like their stories weren't being told at all, if at all. And some of their names most people wouldn't know, unless they're archaeologists. And so, I chose a slice of Pompeian society, and I decided to use my knowledge that I'd built up in my head over very many years. I mean, over 10 years, maybe 12 years, I think now, studying Pompeii. And I used the archaeological evidence to start building their last 24 hours in the city.
Wow.
And of course, as humans, we can put ourselves in those positions and use our common sense to reconstruct what those days might have been like, which is the method I use, which is called critical fabulation.
Yeah, explain that.
Critical fabulation is a term that was coined by a woman called Saadia Hartman, a historian who specialises in the transatlantic slave trade.
Wow.
And she had the same problem that I did, in that we want to tell the stories of invisible people in history, But how do you do that when they are invisible and often deliberately made invisible by their time period, by the people in their time period that are in charge? And I didn't realize I was using this method, by the way. I'd written the book, and then I went to a seminar at Oxford before I started, and someone introduced me to this term, critical fabulation. I thought, oh my God, that's what I'm doing. And essentially what you do is you take the material remains that you have up to the furthest point you possibly can in reconstructing an event or a day or a person. So, for example, I have a slave, Petronus, who is recorded in a loan agreement between two women, interestingly.
Wow, that is interesting.
It is interesting because we've got three invisible voices there in a way. And I thought, okay, I need to reconstruct someone that was deliberately meant to be invisible, but this is an active slave, not a freed person, which is really unusual to find an active slave's name. So I wanted to reconstruct his day. So what might he be doing? Well, he'd be going out shopping at a certain point of the day. He would be supporting the household. He would be, setting up for dinner for the owner, so on and so forth. So, for example, okay, I want him to go to the market in the square. This is what people would do. They would gravitate towards the market, we know that, and then they would gravitate out towards other places like bakeries that they would have preferred, just as we do today. You go to the centre of a town and then you drift out to the side streets, right? Human nature. Okay, where would he be going? Okay, he'd probably be getting fish because we know that Pompeian diets from their skeletons are really, strong in pig. They ate a lot of fish. They'd be eating a lot of vegetables and fruit from the nearby gardens. Okay, where is he getting those from? The Macellum, which is the market. Okay, there was a fish cellar in this Macellum, and I know that because there were loads of fish scales found on the floor of this structure called a tholos, which is a circular building with columns around it and a domed roof. There were lots of fish scales, there were coins there, so clearly we have a fisherman scaling these fish and slicing them and selling them. So Petronus would probably have gone there. So the essential thing about critical fabulation, if it didn't happen or it couldn't have happened, I didn't include it. So this isn't historical fiction in the sense that I invented things that couldn't have possibly happened. At one point it was suggested to me that I should add a crime in for drama, and I couldn't do that, of course, because there was no evidence to that, so it couldn't go in.
But historically, and I mean, perhaps academically, has such techniques been frowned upon in the past, or how is it received now, for example?
The PhD is rigorous in the sense that you're trained to be a better researcher. It's not so much producing the work, it's actually becoming a certain sort of person and being rigorous and critical of yourself and other works and understanding why you're critical of them. It's much broader than just doing a piece of work. Most people don't quite understand that about PhDs. And so, of course, I was trained in questioning information and facts and, being able to transform those into a story. So I would have traditionally been a bit skeptical of critical fabulation for that reason, because I would think, okay, but how can you reconstruct that without information? But you can. I would say, though, there's not a huge amount of historical places or events or situations in time where you would be able to.
There's nothing like Pompeii that's had that mass preservation of a moment in the way that you're describing.
Exactly. I could probably do it about Titanic, for example. We have a huge amount of material evidence, down to menus, down to guests. We know who those guests are. You can go into a huge amount of detail about something like that. But other places, not so much. It becomes a little bit more difficult. But I was a bit nervous about it, but saying that, academia has accepted it more than enough. They love it. Yeah. And at the end of the day, they're viewing it the same way I am, where it's bringing history to life. It's introducing different people to it in a different way. So some people struggle with reading nonfiction because it can be a bit dry and a bit ploddy sometimes. But in this way, it sounds like fiction, but they're learning facts as they go. I describe why a person would go to that building to do that thing, why the politician, for example, in the book by hour, we know what an elite Roman male would be doing. This has been reconstructed and accepted in academia for a long time. And so I'm able to reconstruct his day and his slave behind him, shadowing him throughout the day, and reconstruct those things. And I'm explaining why he's doing these things, why he's having a morning meeting with his clients, why the slave is supporting him in this way, why the slave is dressed a certain way. And so you're learning facts without realizing you're learning them. So
I love that. Do you have to almost put boundaries around stories yourself? Because I would imagine with your teaching, with your output, with what you put out online, there's an entertainment to it. But do you almost have to create those boundaries yourself to go, okay, I need to stop now?
Yes.
Because I'm uncertain of this part, or
yes, you do. You do have to be very careful, and it was a challenge for me. I wanted to make it as engaging and as enjoyable as possible as a story, because ultimately I wanted to give these people their stories back and their voices back.
That's nice.
But you do have to stop yourself, and from my perspective, that was an easy enough thing to do because I knew the material so well that I knew where I could take it up to. But there is the sense of putting your common sense into it as a human and feeling as well. And, going back to what we were talking about before, academia accepted it, but I'm starting to find that people that are very, very, passionate about historical fiction, and that is their thing, their biggest hobby and interest in life, they have struggled with the concept a little bit because it's not quite fantastical enough for them.
That's interesting. I would never think it'd be that crew that have got a problem.
Right, exactly, yeah. So it's been interesting. And, overall, the book has been incredibly well received and it's doing well. But it's been really interesting for me to see this historical fiction fan base sort of questioning, okay, what is this in-between genre? It's almost like a genre has been created in between accidentally while I was doing this.
That feels a very good thing, though.
It was fun, I think. Yeah, I think that's a fun
feels
thing
like
to
you're
say.
onto something. And if anything just landed absolutely perfectly, then I'm not sure that's entirely new. But the fact that you're basically inventing a genre or describing a category that perhaps wasn't there before feels like you're onto something quite powerful. This notion too of the voiceless and your title of the Lost Voices, my God, that's emotive. When you first went to Pompeii, was that one of those immediate moments that you just knew? Like, what was the feeling that came over you?
Yeah, so I went to Pompeii first in my early 20s. I think I was about 20 or 21, so it's quite late. And I don't remember a huge amount from my first visit, interestingly. This was prior to my interest starting when I picked up that first Empresses of Rome book. So I sort of looked at it through the lens that most people do when they go there. They're confused at what they're looking at.
Sure.
They're exhausted because they don't realise how big the city is. But when I went back on that sabbatical that I mentioned, this was the second time I ever went there. I knew I was interested in Pompeii. I'd done my master's dissertation in Pompeii and the gardens, and I just knew I needed to go there first. And something was drawing me there. Again, based on my background, I'd never had the money or the opportunity. I had to just work to go away on my own. I didn't travel or anything like that. And so this was my first time on my own going somewhere, which was very, very scary. And I stood in the forum and I put my earphones in and I put the Pompeii song on. It's really cheesy. But it's one of those moments where I just knew this was a life moment, and I looked up at Vesuvius, which is just looming over the town, and I felt so emotional and tearful because I just knew I was in the right place for my career. I knew that this was something I needed to pursue. I just quit my job about a week before, and I was off doing this on my own, and I just felt this incredible affinity to the place and the people, and yeah, it was something I needed to pursue.
That's such a calling. I mean,
it really was.
It's very powerful what you're describing. What is that, do you think?
I think that you just get these moments in life. We've all had
I think
them.
some people would be very envious that they don't have it or haven't felt that.
And I think they need to keep looking and persist with a curiosity in different things. I think it's very tempting to go with the comfortable things. I have, throughout my whole life, and I'm very grateful for it now, put myself in so many positions that have made me uncomfortable. I have been so uncomfortable in certain rooms and feeling like I don't belong there and, wanting to leave. And
really,
I used to be really quite anxious socially, and now I'm not that at all. I seek those things out. You have to retrain your brain.
That's interesting.
And eventually, when you've tried out enough things, something does click. It's like finding the right person. You know, when you find the right person, it's got absolutely nothing to do with your brain. You just know. You just know. There's nothing you can do about it, even if you wanted to. And that is a calling. And it was the same with Pompeii and the Roman world. I just knew it was a calling. And I go back all the time to Pompeii and Herculaneum, the Bay of Naples in general. I went 9 times last year.
Wow, 9 times, really.
And when you're just to Pompeii.
And when you're going back, I mean, Naples is a wicked city. I'd go there 9 times a year, frankly, alone. Are you going back the equivalent of the holiday, or are you going back because you're working more?
When I'd written the book, I then took a map of Pompeii. I gave each character a colour.
Wow.
And I felt tipped the map in terms of the route that they would have walked through the city. And of course, being so familiar with Pompeii, you know it like the back of my hand, I'd done these walkthroughs and written them in my head, and I thought, right, now I need to actually check that they're correct. So I walked each character's route 1 day each, and I made sure that everything that I'd been seeing in my head, you know, they pass a bakery on the right, there's a fountain on the left, there's so-and-so lives here. And I went through each of those, and, you know, they all did work, and then you find more things. So that was an example of when I was going then. But generally, yeah, I just touch base. The excavations are ongoing also. And of course, I bring it to my followers on Life in the Past Lane as well. Sometimes do lives from the city, which are always really good fun.
I bet they're wonderful. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. Just before we do though, well, perhaps it is right at that. It strikes me that you've got a very unique intersection between this kind of sensual, almost spiritual calling side, and then there's this incredibly technically versed. That's you. That's quite a rich mix, though. That's a very unique mix. That feels. I don't know many of them.
Oh, thank you. I don't know. I think you're right. I'm very spiritual in that way. I very much follow my heart.
But even the first book that has led you to now.
Yes.
It hit you so hard that you've shifted everything.
It did. It was one of my, you know, casual trips to Pompeii. And I stood in front of this inn owned by this innkeeper called Euxinus. And we know this because he had his name on the outside of the property calling for the election of a local politician.
Oh, I love this. Go on.
Yeah. Underneath this image of a phoenix, and he's saying, "The phoenix is lucky, may you be too." So he's a really sweet man. And then inside there was an amphora, which is a wine jug, wine storage container. And it said to Euxinus, in the inn by the amphitheatre. So he's clearly very well known in the local area. He's basically a pub landlord, essentially.
Incredible. Yeah.
And Euxinus is a really interesting person because he created 2 vineyards after an earthquake which hit the town in AD 62, which destroyed much of the city. This is where my academic side comes in. I couldn't believe I found this. I felt like someone should have found this before. 250% increase in urban agriculture in the city. So they responded like we did in COVID.
Wow.
They began gardening again. And he was one of these people. He decided, you know what? I'm going to create a pub garden, and everyone can sit under the vines, and I'm going to serve them from my typical Pompeii counter with the dahlia, you know, the storage jars inside, and they can all go and eat in the garden under the vines like the posh people do. So he was just a brilliant character, and I remember standing in front of the inn, and I could just almost picture him walking around, doing exactly what pub landlords do, you know, like, you know, like talking to the locals, telling people off for getting too drunk, you know, gambling in the back room. And I could just see it. And I thought, he really needs his story told.
Oh, God, yeah.
And then I was like, okay. It gives me shivers now. And I was like, I know what I should do, actually. This is a book. And then as I was walking around, I thought, yep, okay. Julia Felix is one of those. She's a female businesswoman just down the road from him. Again, incredibly industrious, had an advertisement on the outside of her property saying, I've got, you know, Venus baths for discerning customers. I've got shops to rent. I've got apartments.
This is incredible.
She's amazing. And again, she did all of this after the earthquake. She starts thinking, the baths are out of action. I'm going to open my own one.
Entrepreneurial. Wow.
Exactly. And, you know, they're just like that in Naples today. They're very entrepreneurial. Yeah. And so exactly that. I wanted to tell a story of resilience and innovation in Pompeii and show it differently. Instead of looking at the disaster and everyone being sad about that, instead we should think about how much they lived and how vibrant the city was and how incredibly interesting these people were.
Oh my God, that's compelling. I feel I'm absolutely there. You must be very aware of that when you're delivering and the style with which you deliver. Tell us a little bit more about that. So Life in the Past Lane YouTube channel, right? When did you start that? Do you read the comments? You understand it as a community? Tell us more about how you're getting this to so many people.
Yeah, so interestingly, I made the handle Life in the Past Lane during COVID, and then I just didn't do anything with it. I was doing my PhD.
Oh, really?
So I was very, very focused on the PhD and wanted to do that right first, and then I thought other things later. So I started with TikTok. I think I've been on there about 2 years now, and that grew very, very quickly. I think I'm at about 170,000 followers on there now, and that's where I usually do my lives, and built a very, very engaged community on there. So less than a year ago, I thought, okay, I really should probably be on Instagram. And then again, it took off, and I definitely have a very loyal community on there, absolutely. And in the meantime, I sort of dabbled with YouTube. I've got over 5,000 followers on there, subscribers, but I've just set in place a plan for this year.
Go on.
Okay, so my aim ultimately is to create an educational platform for people that came from backgrounds like myself who are interested in history but don't know how to start.
Love it.
So that is the long-term goal. We'll be starting on YouTube as that. I'll be, of course, interviewing some of my history friends. I've got a huge circle of history friends now that are very, very good friends, and they all bring their own amazing perspectives to the ancient world, but all the way up to modern history. And so I really want to bridge that gap and actually make it useful in the sense that if you want to change career, you can, or if you just love history but you hated it at school, which most of us did, it was just dates, and bring those storytelling things back, but personably with people telling them instead of, a voice behind some pictures.
It feels very natural how you've leveraged it. Your enthusiasm is infectious and you have this natural raconteur storytelling ability, which means, of course, TikTok as a platform loved you. Of course, Insta's kind of doing the same. How far does that go? What about things like AI, for example, specifically in the area where we are? There is some stuff that is suppositions. Is this going to be a good thing? Is this going to be powerful? Is this frankly nightmarish? Is this going to be a problem?
I think AI, it needs to be viewed as a tool, and I think people are sort of viewing it in sort of getting carried away perhaps, or perhaps too nervous about it too early. Of course, long term, we can't know what it's going to do, and the people that are very well versed in AI and the technology of it are warning us about it. But primarily, I think it really mustn't, and we can't let it replace curiosity and critical thinking and, the innovativeness of humans. And this is ultimately why we all love history, is because it's stories. They are personable, which AI cannot replace. You cannot replace emotion and feeling that you put into these stories. And I think that's the main thing to remember. It has its uses. It's starting to be used in archaeology a lot for data or for reconstructing the Herculaneum scrolls, for example. There are uses, but we mustn't let it replace what we do history for, which is, very human.
And where fact and fiction begin to blur. It's reminding me that some of my reels and TikToks, I've sent some to my son, are effectively classic AI recreations, reconstructions of historical events that I have learnt from. I'm probably fighting with myself thinking what's right and wrong there, as in I've probably learnt a bit, but am I learning fact?
That's exactly it. Let's go back to the Titanic example. Unless you're informed on Titanic, how on earth would you inform AI to create a reconstruction of the Titanic event? In addition, why would you want to reconstruct a disaster and watch it happen? We have to analyze why, as humans, we are so obsessed with disaster.
Yeah, isn't it disaster porn? Is that a term?
Essentially, we're being trained by these, social platforms particularly to hunt out these things that give us that feeling. Instead of dopamine, it's almost like we're going the other way.
Gosh.
We need to really remember that these things are disaster-based. Pompeii particularly, we need to treat it in that way, in the sense that we need to be respectful of it. Would it be appropriate to recreate a disaster in modern times that we've all witnessed in that way? No. So would it be appropriate doing it 2,000 years ago? No. And do we know that it's accurate? Because who's creating it? Who's behind these videos? I think they found the guy that was doing the videos of the girl that's going through the streets of Pompeii and stuff. And it was a British guy in, a suburb in the UK, and he was creating them, but he's not a historian. So, okay, what is he telling AI? And how do we know that it's accurate unless you're informed in those things? And that's where it's tricky.
So the disaster porn point you're making, I've never considered before. And I guess we're awe-inspired as humans. We can't help but we go, oh my God, this thing happened then. The meteorite crash, that big boat sunk, whatever the version of that is at whatever historical moment in world history. That being retold in that way elicits a feeling. But what you captured, where you got me earlier, you're telling me stories of the landlord and the signage on the front and advertise that feels nuanced, but ultimately there's joy and positivity and it's celebratory around life. Should it be more of that we need to spend time with? Absolutely.
Like we're speaking about, that humans are drawn to disaster because partly we're able to detach ourselves from it because it's a collective event. And sadly, often with disasters, even now, we don't humanize them. Psychologically speaking, that's how we're able to deal with it and sit with it. But because of that, we become numb to it.
Yeah.
We become numb to the fact that there were real people involved in these disasters that lived and got up and had the same hopes and dreams for their day that we do. They experienced jealousy, they experienced love, they had friends, they had family, they had dogs. These are real things and real events and real people. And it's the same with current disaster. We need to reframe how we're thinking about it and be better as humans in that way and think, okay, but there's that volcano that destroyed all of these towns. Okay, not towns. 20,000 people in Pompeii were affected by this, not to mention all of the other cities around that place and the knock-on effect of those things. And where did those people go? I've measured about an 8 to 11% mortality rate in Pompeii alone, which, relatively speaking, it could have been far, far worse. They didn't know what was going to happen and they had no context for this. They didn't know it was a volcano. So that's pretty good considering. But at the same time, we need to take it back and think, okay, they were made refugees, the other 90% of people. Where did they go? And it's never spoken about. So it's something we need to look at differently, I think, disaster.
So that is a segue. How much do you want the work and your output to be shining a light on issues and societal kind of conversation today? Do you see the potential ramifications of the output?
Yes, it's very important for me, definitely.
Really?
And I think, it goes back to my background. I think it's just really important that for different reasons, I can sympathise with these ordinary people in the sense that they become forgotten in time because of the nature of their work or who they were, whether they were a woman or a slave in the case of Pompeii, or even in the East End, workers that were churning the cogs of industry.
Literally.
And they get forgotten in the place of, some guy that happened to own estates for very many generations going back and happened to basically own all of their labour. Okay, we talk about him and all of his wonderful things. Is it wonderful, really? Or is it the people underneath that were going in every day? They hadn't a choice. They were working for, their 4 children at home who were barely eating and couldn't afford shoes. That's different. That's a story. That's a story to me. I have a problem when you go to museums and the interpretation on labels says things like, so-and-so donated this, so-and-so bought it, this important lord had this in his house. Who cares? Who painted the thing?
I love that.
Who's in the picture? Why is there a person in the back that's clearly a servant? Who is that? Different stories, and we need to start looking at it differently entirely, I think.
I absolutely love that. It's a democratization of knowledge to the masses, not just the few, right? Is that a more commonly understood and practiced part of history right now? Is that a thing, or is this beyond yourself?
Yes.
Because it feels it definitely should be, and people...
It should be. It should be, absolutely. I think we need to move away from, things in my realm, for example, emperors, very, very interesting. Who are the people behind it is much more interesting to me. And this is becoming more of a preoccupation in archaeology, definitely.
Really?
Particularly in Pompeii, within the last few years, there's a new director, and he is putting much more of an emphasis in the excavations on ordinary people and slaves and working experiences. Previously, those things weren't seen as glamorous enough. They were mainly treasure hunting historically, particularly right at the beginning of the excavations. They were treasure hunting for kings, and so
would the stuff just be ignored?
It was thrown away.
Thrown away.
So you have literally bones, pots, the things of everyday industry chucked away because it wasn't interesting to them. They used to smash frescoes off of the walls because, again, it wasn't interesting to them. Completely unnecessary, mind you, just leave it there. But we do have more younger voices in history who understand this, and I think that any of those people that I know have the same sort of background as I have. They're either not traditionally academically trained in that way, but bring a huge amount to history, or they are academically trained, but have a different background like myself, and not a non-traditional, classist sort of background. I use classist in a careful way there, but you know what I mean, where it's not that stereotypical way where we think of it. And I think those people are the best placed to start pushing these ordinary stories forward and starting to place an emphasis on the right places, in my opinion. We've told the elite stories. The
difference, the diversity in this new breed of practitioners is allowing us around the world now to then be viewing and consuming history differently. They are unbelievably fundamental aspects of being a human right now, walking around Earth.
Yes, exactly.
But you're really bringing it down to the fact that, well, do you know what, more diverse selection of voices, approaching things in a different way and delivering it perhaps in a new novel format can do that's unbelievably important, right? It
is, and it comes down also to being in the privileged position I'm in now at Oxford, as a Leverhulme Early Career Fellow, funded for 3 years.
Wonderful.
I'm in a good position now to try and make a difference. It's important that people like myself increase access to this information. And that's been the real struggle for me throughout this unusual career I've had, was having access to the information to be able to actually get into the space.
Really?
Particularly in archaeology. Any archaeologist listening will know that, traditionally speaking, archaeologists sort of sit on their information, I always say, like Smaug in The Hobbit, like this pile of gold that they don't want to share. I can't share that because someone will steal it. That's the whole point of our job, is to collaborate, use information and interpret it. That is the point of it. Otherwise, you are just treasure hunting also for your own gain. You're not getting anything out of it if you're not publishing it. I think it's really, really important that if we are, in positions in other industries as well, if you're in a position of privilege where you're able to access information, but you're recognizing that it's not accessible to others, that is your moment to do something about it.
What does 10 years from now look like to the historian doing things differently?
That's such a good question. You've probably worked out I just sort of take everything day by day and go where my heart goes. But yes, having that educational platform, definitely, and opening up, charitable opportunities for people like myself and children who aren't, are either told that something's not for them, a career isn't for them, or don't even know about it. I think, even just being educated on the different opportunities that history, for example, as a career can open up. There are so many different avenues to go down. But for me at school, if you'd asked me, I'd probably said, a teacher.
Sure.
I wouldn't have had any clue. No. And even just training in history can give you so many different skills. So I think opening up those, that's what my aim is, in a broad sense, is to open up charitable opportunities that will educate children on opportunity and physically give them those opportunities. But yes, long term, I would just keep plugging away.
I think you're doing more
academia and writing. I think
plugging away is a very humble way of describing it. And the access point, the fact that you're there doing a live, or TikTok's blowing up, would the perfect scenario still be that someone's there physically in real life, being a part of it, being able to touch and sense and smell and feel and have those feelings that you had when you looked around?
Yeah.
Is that still all important? Can anything replace that?
No, nothing can replace that ever. No, it's being in touch with it is the best thing ever for history. I mean, even just standing on a step in a castle that's been worn away takes you so much closer than, me sitting and telling you about it ever could. And again, it's an access thing, isn't it? And, going back to my parents and my wider family, they were always interested in history, always took us to castles and heritage sites and things like that. And I think giving more families more opportunity to do that is really important, and showing them the benefits of that, and that they are, welcome in those spaces. I've definitely spoken to people that when I've volunteered in many of these places or worked in them. I used to be a redcoat at Hampton Court Palace.
Oh,
and I have pretty good. And I've genuinely spoken to people who've stood there and made me cry. Genuinely, I'm not kidding, because they've said to me, "I didn't think that I would be allowed in a space like this.
Wow.
I didn't feel like this place was for me, and now I've come here and everyone's really, really nice to me. It makes me realise I've been missing out." That's awful. And that
Absolutely.
should never, ever, ever happen to anyone from any background. And so it's a global responsibility, for sure, to stop that happening and to give people those different messages that they are welcome in these spaces, and that history is for everyone.
So when you're delivering your incredible stories, we're right in a space now that it's very simple that I could perhaps watch your content on a pair of new Snap or Meta glasses right now.
Sure.
Or augmented reality. In other words, the leveraging of tech to attempt to entice more of those young brains. Is that a tricky area, or do you think that can be done elegantly in a way that still works?
I think so, yeah, absolutely, because the first thing is to understand what you're looking at, isn't it? So someone like myself being able to tell those stories is really, really important. And technology, like I said, it's almost like with AI, it's a tool. If we're using it in the right way, and we're positive about these experiences, hopefully people will start going out and being curious themselves and doing what I did, where, I quit my job, or they, changed career, or they think, actually, what, a master's is for me. I'm going to give it a go. What's the worst that could happen? And actually just talking about these things and making them more everyday and quotidian, I think are really, really important. And technology is really well placed to do that. It just mustn't replace those in-person experiences that mean so much to us when we look back. Most of us have memories from childhood, and that are really big moments in our lives, and they're always tactile, they're always emotional.
Yeah.
We're not going to think about, a YouTube video we
agree.
watched. It's actually about when I watched a YouTube video about a castle and then I went to see it, and wow.
Yeah, they say you never dream of phones for a reason.
Right?
And
that's true, actually.
Yeah.
Creepy.
You never dream of your phone, but we spend 90% of our bloody day on it. So the continuation of that exposing and telling of the right stories from people who are otherwise forgotten, as tech continues to evolve, will be both a challenge but hopefully an opportunity.
Yes, hopefully an opportunity. That's my hope.
Jess, you have been remarkable. I'm utterly inspired. I can't wait to be diving into your content almost immediately after this. Thank you so much for coming in today and telling us all about this sort of brilliance.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this week's show, please follow us on Instagram at StoryCodePod. Subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Trust me, it really does help. StoryCode is a Telltale Industries production. It's recorded in Studio One at the brilliant TYX Studios here in King's Cross. It's produced by Jago Lee, assistant produced by Nellie Batt. Special thanks to Craig Hepsinstall, Jack Freegard, Tyler Newton, Issa Gibson. I'm James Kirkham. This has been a masterclass in how storytelling pays in this modern media landscape. Go out, tell a story that matters, and we'll see you next week.